Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. December 10th, 2014. Greenville, Georgia. I worked at a water treatment plant the year after I graduated high school. I grew up in a small town in Georgia, so I didn't have many choices if I didn't want to go away to college or have a really long commute to a job that wouldn't pay that much better anyway. I knew it would only be a short-term situation until I decided what I wanted to do with my life. The job itself wasn't too hard, but it was sometimes so boring that it was hard to stay awake. I mostly just sat at a desk with 6 monitors in front of me and looked for anything strange, anything or anyone that could mess up the water reservoir or make it dirty. I almost always worked the night shift, which was fine with me because I was a night owl and liked the peace and quiet of being there at night when there were fewer people. In December, it was a cool night around midnight, about an hour after I started my shift. Joe was the only other person I saw at work that night. Joe was a nice older man who worked on equipment inspection and maintenance. We had talked a little bit about the upcoming company Christmas party, which would really just be a bunch of guys drinking too much and being even more annoying than they usually were at work. Joe was trying to convince me to go to the party anyway, even though I was one of only 4 or 5 women who worked there. I had already decided not to go, since I was leaving that job after Christmas to start classes at a community college. So, I was looking at the monitors while I looked through a catalog of college courses. Most of the time, there wasn't much to see except for the odd animal that got through the fence. But that night was not like the others. I thought at first that I saw movement, but the image was kind of blurry. We didn't have the best cameras, and sometimes the pictures would fade in and out. I thought it was probably Joe doing a walkthrough. But when it got closer to the camera, I could see the image clearly and screamed. It looked like a dog's head, but it wasn't a dog. Whatever it was much too big to be a dog, and it stood on 2 legs with long arms hanging at its sides. Its body was so big and strong that it almost looked like a gorilla. I ran to the door and opened it just as Joe came running toward me. He was running so fast and looking so scared that he almost knocked me down. Joe locked the door as soon as we got inside. I asked him what was outside, but he didn't say anything. He just looked out the window, and up at the top of the door. We just stood there and stared as the thing walked slowly by. Then I realized how big it was. Joe, it was probably 8 or 9 feet tall. And I didn't say anything. At first, we just stared at that animal or whatever it was. Then, it turned and ran up the 10-foot barbed wire fence without stopping. I thought I must be dreaming, but it wasn't a dream. Joe and I could finally talk. We thought we must have seen a werewolf a few minutes later. We didn't feel any better just because we thought there might be a werewolf around. We went online right away to see if we could find anything that would help us understand what we had just seen. We finally found pictures and descriptions that seemed to match what we had seen. There is no proof of what happened, and we didn't tell anyone else at first because we knew no one would believe us without proof. We thought there might be a video of it, so the next day we asked our supervisor. But it turns out that every 12 hours, the cameras recorded over the tape. So the proof never came. I quit that job the next week and moved out of town a few years later. Joe kept working there until he retired last year. Joe and I have stayed in touch, and even if no one else believes us, we know what we saw that night. It was a Dogman in Noblesville, Indiana, on June 22, 2013. A few years ago, I went to my first music fest. It was a small event in the area. It wasn't as big or crazy as Coachella. There are probably no more than 2,000 people there. The festival lasted 3 days, and my friends and I were among the maybe 500 people who camped out overnight. There were 3 small, very basic campsites set up in the field near the stages. Just a few places to set up tents and a few portable toilets. The festival took place in a field that was mostly open, with trees around the edges. It was held far outside of town on purpose so that the music and partying wouldn't bother people who live nearby. The first night of camping went well, but the second night wasn't very comfortable or quiet because some people drank all night. Around 3 a.m., my friends and I tried to fall asleep. We were a group of 4 people with 2 tents. So I gave my best friend one. At that point, luckily, our campground was pretty quiet, and we were hoping for a better night's sleep than the first. However, before we could fall asleep, we heard the screaming. Not the kind of screaming that is fun and silly, but the kind you hear in scary movies. Everyone rushed out of their tents to see what was going on. The moon was hidden by clouds, and there were only a few lights on the way to the bathroom. It was very dark, and we couldn't see what was going on. But we could see that something was going on at the far end of our campground, where a group of girls were crying and screaming and a lot of people were trying to calm them down. We looked at it for a minute, but we didn't get any closer. It didn't seem like much of a big deal. When the second round of screaming started, we were getting ready to go back to our tents. This time, it was on the other side of the field. 3 guys ran out of their tents, shouting something we didn't understand. Something was definitely going on, and I was starting to worry, but I had no idea what it was. After the third round of screaming, we heard someone yell something about a dog, which was even more confusing. Why on earth would a dog make someone scared? No dogs were running around, and we hadn't heard any barking or growling. But the campground was a mess. At this point, it didn't help that at least half of the campers were drunk or on other party favors that made them easily confused and excited. Some of them ran out of the field to their cars, but there was a big group huddled together and waving their flashlights wildly. We wanted to find out what was going on. So, we went up to that group, looked for a younger guy who seemed sober, and asked him what was going on. He told us that people had seen a huge wild dog in the campground, and that it had almost attacked the girls and torn up the tent of a group of guys. While he was telling us this, I could hear a girl crying and saying that it wasn't a dog, but I didn't know what she meant. Was it or wasn't it a dog? People were talking about calling the police, but they would probably take 20 or 30 minutes to get there. Others wanted to run to their cars, but they were too scared to run across the open field. We were still very confused about why everyone was so scared. No one was hurt, and people had different ideas about what was out there. I was starting to think it might be a case of group hysteria, or a poor stray dog that was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I convinced my friends that there was no point in staying out in the field all night, and that we should go back to our tent. We got back to our campsite without any problems and set up our tents. Again, my friend and I waited for a while to see if there would be more noise before trying to sleep. 10 minutes later, as we sat and talked about the festival, a huge shadow came close to our tent, stopped in front of it, and then moved on. He thought it was a person because it was tall, but he didn't want to open the tent until he was sure. A minute later, we heard very close by screams. This time, someone knocked on our tent and yelled at us to run. At this point, we were so scared that we ran outside. We could see that most of the people in the big group had split up and were running in different directions. Something big and dark was right behind them. I tried to figure out what it was by looking into the dark field. It ran on 2 legs like a person, but it wasn't really shaped like a person. It was bigger and had a bigger head. I took out my flashlight and pointed it at the dark shape. I could see right away what had gone wrong. I also felt it. The head of the thing was like a dog's, with a long snout, big teeth, and yellow eyes. However, the body was more like a person than a dog, with long, thin legs and a torso. The thick dark fur all over the body made the shape look strange to me. When it got closer and we could see it clearly, we started running. We ran out with everyone else to get to the parking lot. I only turned around once, but I saw it get down on all fours and run into the woods. When we got to our car, we left our tents and sleeping bags behind and drove away. The next day, the festival went on as usual, but it ended at midnight, and our camping area was all roped off. Even though at least 20 or so witnesses said otherwise, the official story was that a coyote attacked. We lost all of our credibility because most of the witnesses were drunk. I read about the festival Dogman on the internet. So I know that other people saw the same things I did. Even though no one believed us, it was clear that we all knew what it was. I live in a small town in Washington state about 30 to 45 minutes east of Spokane. I'm a big fan of Dogmen and other cryptids, and I'm telling you this because I feel like I have my own Dogman story to tell. Even though I haven't seen or heard it, I do think there's something strange going on in my neighborhood based on what I've heard and read. I can only think of one reason. I live in a pretty wooded part of my neighborhood, which isn't your typical small suburban area. You know, little houses close to each other, trees all around, and a growing number of people. Here, the houses are a little farther apart, and there are more older people living in them. So, I understood why there were less people. So, putting those facts aside, why do I think there's a dogman in our neighborhood when I can't find much in Washington state about dogmen? All of the neighborhood cats have gone missing in the last 3 or 4 months. I know this might sound weird and could easily be put down to something else, not a dogman. But hear me out. I've read a few reports on Vic Cundiff's website, North American Dogman Project, and listened to several, if not all of your Dogman videos. There seems to be a common theme of pets going missing in neighborhoods. I know that the Bigfoot lives in Washington state. Even though I don't know much about Bigfoot, I think it's strange that so many cats are going missing. The majority of cats in the area live outside. I know this because I'm friends or at least know most of my neighbors, if not all of them. They're all older and don't mind talking to people or looking you in the eye. Unlike most people under 30 or 40 years old today, they actually like to talk to each other. Since I've been here for a long time, I've had the chance to get to know these people pretty well. Many people in my area have said that between late night and early morning, a big black dog wanders around the area. Sometimes they only catch a quick glimpse of it, and other times it acts very strange. I've never heard that it was walking on 2 legs. As most people would expect, it only ever has 4 legs. They don't see any connections between it and that. People always say that a wolf looks like a big, black dog. I couldn't find out what its ears looked like, how its face was shaped, or even if it had a tail. But they said the worst thing was the way they were acting. They acted like they were up to something or like they were suspicious. It's hard to explain, but 4 or 5 of my neighbors have told me they've seen it. I mean, it's not like they see it and then ask me if I've seen it in a casual conversation. From now on. Like I said, at least 5 of them have told me they've seen this thing popping up around the neighborhood since then. When it was October. I don't know the exact date, but that's about when all the cats started going missing. I'd say it was probably in December, around the middle of the month. They had all left. I don't know for sure what it is, but I thought getting in touch with you might help. I sent Vic Cundiff an email. I emailed them, but I haven't heard back, so I figured you were the next best option. How do you explain it? Is it possible that we could be dealing with dogmen even in our small state of Washington? Or could it be a Bigfoot or something completely different? Or is this just a lot of luck? And maybe, just maybe, what we're dealing with is a big group of wild coyotes. I don't know what the answer is, and I really, really hope we're not dealing with a real dog, man. I don't feel ready for that.